Welcome to another episode of Kitchen Conversations, where today we are talking to Mark Peifer, the head of the USA Pickleball Rules Committee. He is the head official and knows everything about the rules that are going to be changed for 2023. And we get to talk to the man about those changes. But before we do that, I want to thank our sponsors, Fitvine Wines. As we've talked about before, the best wine out there, no added chemicals or sugars. It can be healthy. You can drink to your heart's content and still feel good about it. I know I do. I think you should too. Go for it. Fitvine Wines. Check them out. All right. Now to bring on the man, Mark Peifer, who can tell us everything about the rules for 2023. Mark, how are you?
Very good, Jason. Glad to be with you. But I got to tell you, I got to find that wine. You got to tell me where I can buy that stuff.
I will point you in the right direction.
All right. That looks pretty good. Looks inviting.
So, Mark, we have a less significant amount of rule changes than we did last year. Last year, obviously, there was a lot of attention on the spin serve. This year, we also have a conversation about the spin serve. It is completely going away, is it not?
It is. We've looked at this now for 2 years in different formats. The spin off the paddle, then the spin out of the fingers, and now it's basically going back to no spin, imparted spin with the offhand or any body part. So that's the big change for this year. A big change for some. Not so much of a change for most of the players that play pickleball.
And I think that was part of your reasoning for this change, right? And just to be clear about what this change is. 2 years ago, we had the chainsaw where you could spin it off your paddle. Last year, you changed it to where one hand, your offhand, could spin the ball, and then you could hit it. This year, we're saying no more spin at all, both on a regular volley serve and on a drop serve. So
Correct.
There is no spin anymore. And obviously, when you drop a ball, there's some spin that takes place. But
I think the players will see that language in the rule book when it gets released. We plan on having it posted on the USA Pickleball website as planned on or before the 1st of December. But the language that people are going to see is that we recognize that there is going to be some natural rotation of the ball that occurs through a normal free release of the ball, whether it's a drop serve or you're doing the volley serve. There has to be some rotation that happens to the ball as you're transferring it from your non-paddle hand to be able to hit it with the paddle. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the obvious manipulation of the ball where you're flicking it either up or this way or that way. And I think most people that have ever seen the impact of that kind of a serve know what we're trying to prevent here. That doesn't mean there's a certain population that says, well, no spin. Well, wait a minute, I can spin the ball with my paddle, can I? Yes. So that has been preserved. That's always been there. The paddle can impart spin through, kind of a side, almost a kind of a side underhand motion. You see it a lot with those backhand servers. There's always some spin that occurs on the ball. But this rule eliminates any pre-serve spin with any body part, most notably the hand.
Got it. And so you're saying that we can still do a slice serve using the open paddle face or closed paddle face?
Especially on the drop serve. You can still do that on the drop serve. It's a little more problematic, obviously, with a volley serve because you got to still comply with those 3 rules, the upward arc, the paddle below the wrist and below the waist, or not above the waist, really. So those things are preserved in the volley serve. But yeah, you're welcome to try anything you want to with the drop serve.
I got a question for you, and I probably should know this, but it comes to mind when I think about the volley serve when the drop serve. I know that we say that all the rules of serving kind of go out the window, and you can then hit the ball from any angle, upward, downward motion. All those things kind of go out the window. So a drop serve, you can hit, you don't need to be going upward motion. You don't need to be below the navel, even though physics will tell you kind of have to do it that way.
Right.
What about having your foot on the ground? Is that something that
all the feet rules still apply for both the volley and the drop serve? So you have to have one foot in contact with the ground at the point of contact with the ball. And that foot has to be within the confines of that box, if you will,
Okay.
that you're serving from. So yeah, so all the feet rules still apply.
Okay. And the rationale behind this rule change was that some of the court space is limited in some environments, that people are getting run into walls or fences. Is that accurate? That was one of the
yeah, I mean, exactly. We took a look at this and we wanted to see, we actually said last year that we were going to look at how deep and wide this spin serve penetrates the sport. Do we see pockets of it with some age group of individuals and certain athletes? Yeah, certainly we do. We see it especially with males, younger males that are able to practice this and get good at it, get really good at it. But we didn't see it so much with the female players. And so that was important to us, that it did not penetrate the women population of players, because one of the things that even the proponents of the spin serve said is that, hey, once you see it enough, then you'll get used to it and you can play against it and you can read it and all those kinds of things. Well, heck, if nobody's really using it in great numbers, it's difficult to get to that point. So that was important. The second thing is, obviously, as you pointed out, there are some, if you do this right, and there are some folks, as you well know, in fact, you're one of them, who does this very, very well, has been able to perfect this. When you're taking, a normal size tennis court and you're dividing it into 4 pickleball courts, whether you have barriers or not, the better players can take somebody and really run them 2 to 3 feet into the next court. And if you're playing indoors and that barrier to your right or to your left is a wall, then we have safety issues that we have to deal with. So that was also a big consideration. The spin that you see off the paddle is not necessarily normally as dramatic as you can get at the higher levels of spinning it with your hand.
Yeah. And did the rules committee ever consider applying the rules to boundaries in terms of size of a court? Because and you're right, because I know I played in a lot of tournaments where they pack them onto a tennis court, and I understand the reason why they do this, but at some point it feels like maybe there should be a rule that says there needs to be X amount of space between courts. Was that ever any consideration?
That's not something that has come to the rules committee, but I can see very easily where it's going to come to that point. We get asked this question quite a bit for new court construction. New court and kind of some court conversions where they're going to take, a certain number of tennis courts. What's the optimal size? The rule book describes the different kinds of sizes of courts, all the way from a stadium court, which you see at Nationals, which is huge. It's the biggest court in the game, obviously. And then you have the recommended minimum size for recreational play. So those court dimensions are there for court conversion companies to use and for new construction. So the new construction, obviously, it's a cost issue for many facilities. How big do I want to make this court with the footprint that I have to work with? But I think you ask a very good question, and it wouldn't surprise me over the next few years that we have a minimum size court for sanctioned play, but we don't have it right now.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I wish you could do something about unsanctioned play as well, quite honestly.
I do too, but I have little authority there.
I know. So another rule that came into play was the replay or fault on the serve. And we saw this happen the other day at a PPA event. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was Jay DeVilliers was playing against Tyson McGuffin, and Tyson was serving what Jay, I think, thought was illegally. Then Jay started serving a little bit high, and the ref actually called him on it, gave him a warning, said replay the serve, and he did it again, and they replayed it again. And this had no significant consequence other than replay it again, which felt like there was a kind of a loophole here. And now, if I read this new rule correctly, an official can call a fault when it is served incorrectly. Is that right?
Well, first of all, I'm not familiar with what the PPA rule actually says. I haven't seen anything in writing, but I'll tell you, we wrote the rule to guard against exactly what you saw in that particular match. If the serve is clearly illegal, the official, if there's a referee, must and shall call the fault. So if you call a fault on an obviously illegal serve, just like you do today, this new rule doesn't affect that. If it's clearly illegal, we expect the referees to call the fault on the serve.
So what is so a replay is when they can't definitively.
If it's questionable. I think that's the word we're trying to use and to describe how you differentiate between a reserve, improper serve, reserve, and a fault. Fault is very clearly out of bounds of those three elements of the volley serve. If it's a volley serve and it's questionable, then the referee has a tool in their toolbox to call the reserve, and that is your warning, and you're going to get on whether or not that's acceptable to continue to serve that way. So
does it work as a warning? In fact,
I mean, so you get to reserve it. Now the question is, what if, and this is an obvious question, and it's something we're going to have to deal with in the officiating handbook. I can tell you what I would do today as a referee, but I'm not ready to make this, the rule for all referees. But if I call, let's say you're serving, and I think you're serving above the waist, but I'm not certain of it, but it's questionable. I'll call it reserve. We'll replay it. You get to do that twice. And after the second time, if you haven't learned to change your behavior to get it where it's obviously not questionable, then I've got another tool in my toolbox, and it's called a technical warning. I'll just give you a technical warning for delay a game. I've told you about this twice. You're not learning. It's time to make a dramatic change in how you're delivering the serve. And the technical warning should get your attention.
Okay. It's a little blurry to me, quite honestly, because because a legal serve is a questionable serve, right? It could be 1 degree below 90 degrees. So that you can push the boundaries of the rule to be questionable every time and still be within the rules. But now you're saying if you can't tell clearly and it is questionable, it could become a fault, which.
Well, if it's questionable, it shouldn't be a fault. It should be a replay. If, however, you don't change this enough so that it's no longer questionable, then you're playing.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So now it needs to be clear. It's no longer.
Exactly. You have to make enough of a change to your service routine and motion to make sure I don't have any chance to call it questionable. And let's face it, you and I both know that most players that do this know they're bordering on the line. It's normal. I do that. You do it. We're losing an advantage if we don't come right up to the limit of the rule, right? Especially in this case. Sure. And so everybody's willing to do that, and we accept that as officials, that people are going to test the boundaries. Well, what's nice about this is that you can test the boundaries, and if we think it's questionable, we'll give you a chance to fix it. So it doesn't become a fault.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. What about in
and I think this is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is very similar to what we did with the profanity rule. Referees all had a different threshold on what constituted profanity. And it was very normal for players to get upset and say, well, wait a minute, I just used the same word in my last match and the referee didn't say anything, and now you're giving me a technical warning for profanity. So that led to the verbal warning, so that now the players could say, okay, well, this referee's got a different threshold for this. I better back off. So this is very similar in vein here. Okay, look, you're getting very close to my threshold as a referee for a fault. Don't make me call a fault on you for this. I'm going to give you a chance to fix this. Here's your warning, replay. Got it.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question of, what about matches that don't have a referee?
Yeah, so the opponents, the receivers, can call for a replay just like they can today if they can't see the release of the ball, and if they think there's a spin on the ball, they can call for a replay.
But can I call a fault?
There is no provision. In fact, there are no faults that you as an opponent can call on the person or team across the other side of the net. The closest you can come to is on as you know, is on a foot fault. You can call the foot fault, but if they don't agree, it's a replay. That's the only fault in all of the rule book that you can call on your opponent. But
Okay.
so what if the player doesn't change their behavior and you think it's an illegal serve or even a questionable serve? Well, it's just like anything else. You have to call the referee or the tournament director over.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I think that makes sense.
You can certainly mention it to your opponents and say, "Hey, it looks like to me you're above the waist," but you can do that today as well.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify that the opponent cannot call a fault. That would be left to officiated matches, and a
Correct.
referee has the power to do that now.
Right.
Got it. That makes sense. Then a couple other rules that changed the player questions about correct serve and player position. Up till now, officials were not allowed to. I guess you could ask, but they couldn't tell you preemptively. What has changed in this? Now players can ask kind of non-specifically, am I good?
Yeah, that's part of the lexicon now of pickleball. And some pro players started doing that, and then players saw it being asked on live stream, so they started asking it, but we didn't have any real treatment of it in the rule book because the rule book required you to answer, am I in the right position? Am I the right server? And what's the score? I mean, those are the three questions you could basically ask. We didn't have anything that says you could ask, am I good?
Right.
So it created some conflicts with the rest of, well, what the heck does this mean? So we had to work through that over the last year. And so what you see now going in 2023, this perfectly acceptable for a player to ask the referee, rather than ask all three of those questions in some kind of order, just ask, hey, am I good here? And then as a referee, we will say either you're good or you're not. And if you're not good, no, you're not good because your partner is the correct server. So we get away from these 2 or 3 additional questions to finally get to where we're going to get to anyway. So just ask, am I good? And that we all referees will recognize that is the same thing as asking any of those or all 3 of those questions at the same time.
Okay, good. That makes sense. I like that rule. And then another kind of big one here is if a wrong score is called, and this came up this year in Atlanta, the Catherine Parento, Leah Jansen match against Lucy and Callie. A wrong call was a wrong score was called by an official, and as the play went on, Catherine recognized that it was the wrong score, and she said something. And the point was deducted. They lost the point. It was on game point, mind you. And that was a pretty hard way to lose a game, particularly of that significance. I remember writing about it and saying this seems like a loophole in the rules here that shouldn't be punishable to the receiving team when the official made the wrong call, and to have to live with that for the entire point, knowing in the back of your mind that was not the right call, seemed unfair. So now we have corrected that, and you can stop the play before the return of serve. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was a groundswell of opinion back after this rule was changed. We said, yeah, you can question the score of this call, but you got to get it in before the serve was made. But but the ball becomes live as soon as the referee starts to call the score, and as soon as they're done calling the score, you are free to serve the ball. So in many cases, after a very short window of opportunity for the receiver to say, "Oh, wait a minute, it's a wrong score." So we had to address that, and so what we did is we went actually back to the 2021 rule where you can question the calls of the wrong score called up until the return of serve, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think so. And then, so now you can do that. If you don't question it before the return of serve and it was a wrong score, it will be amended after the point. Is that correct?
Right. And that was our thinking with the 2022 rule change, is that, hey, just fix it at the end of the rally. But there's a certain population of people for whom, if they hear the wrong score, they're going to be wondering, is the referee going to recognize that they called the wrong score at the end of the rally? So it bothers the heck out of them. Their mind is not on the rally, it's on the wrong score. And I think we completely underestimated the impact that had on certain players. I asked them to wait until the end of the rally. So
yeah, I think that would be sitting on my mind. I'm looking for any excuse to blame my hitting the ball into the net for, and that would absolutely be at the top. One other thing, if you stop the point and the score was called correctly, then is it a do-over, or is it
no? It's a fault.
Lose that point.
It's a fault.
You lose that point. So you better be right. If you hear it,
you better be right.
What happens if I hear it, particularly in a non-refereed match? I hear them say something, I stop it, say, no, it's 4-1, and you said 4-2, and they say, no, I said 4-2.
Well, if it's a non-refereed match, you can't call a fault on the person for calling the wrong score, and they can't call a fault on you for catching the ball, so you're at a stalemate. So you just replay the point.
Okay, so then a non-officiated
or you call a referee over to try and adjudicate that, but it's much easier in that case. In rec play and in non-officiating matches, like I said, you can't call a fault on your opponent, so you might as well just agree to replay the thing.
So when it comes to rules about hearing properly, because I think that particularly with a older demographic, and we're seeing more and more indoor facilities incredibly noisy. I sometimes have a hard time hearing, and I'm not as old as some people that I play with. And I do wonder if there's anything that's being thought of in the rules that would alleviate having to hear. I mean, is there any kind of thought to hand signals or some visual?
Well, here's what I tell you what I do in that situation, because I found myself in the same thing. So if I'm serving or I'm receiving, it doesn't matter. If I'm going to pick up the ball, I just say, hey, it's 5-4-2, right? To the server. So I'm providing what I think the score is. When if I'm serving, when I get the ball, the first thing I do is I say 5-4-2, and then I get into position and call it again. So that's an opportunity, I think, that players can work with their opponents to kind of figure out how they want to address that in a noisy environment. It just makes perfectly good sense, rather than write a rule that might work indoors and not outdoors, or hearing impaired or not hearing impaired. It's always better in those circumstances. The players just get together before the match starts and say, hey, how you want to handle this noise business? How about if I call the score twice?
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Just in general, when I say I can't remember a score for the life of me, let's just say it every time we have a chance.
Right. And by the way, we did talk about that as a potential rule change, but the outcry was deafening against calling the score twice.
Okay. So there's a new rule about apparel and what colors you can wear, and that there's a rule about not wearing a color the same color as the ball. Is that are there any limitations on that? Is that your shirt cannot be yellow, or your shorts can't be yellow, a skirt, socks, shoes?
Yeah, you're asking the right questions here, Jason. The rule has always been in existence that the tournament director had the ability to enforce apparel changes for, quote, inappropriate apparel. But we never really defined that word inappropriate. And I think in most cases people decided that was, profane topics or words or political statements, and those that have no business, in a pickleball court, in a tournament at least. But there's an awful lot of attention now given to the fact that we're playing with these neon green or yellow balls, and that seems to be a popular color to wear on the courts. And that in some circumstances, the ball could actually look like it has disappeared in the background of a similar colored shirt. The only thing we did in the rules this year was to add a specific color suggestion that it might be inappropriate. It might be inappropriate. Again, the tournament director owns the decision on this, but we added the color issue as an example of what might be inappropriate and what might cause a tournament director to ask the player for an apparel change. Now, consistent with that, we also are requiring tournament directors that are asking to be a sanctioned event to give us the color of the ball. So it's not only X40 or a Dura 40, but also what color ball is going to be used in that tournament. So when they apply for sanctioning, that information is known and required. Again, as a forewarning to the players who now know, I better not add on my shirt, I better not wear a shirt or any apparel for that matter that closely approximates the color of the ball, because I could get asked to change my shirt or whatever.
Yeah. And what about, are there any rules about the color of the paddle being the same color as the ball?
There are not. That was also one that was proposed, but we're not ready yet to tell the manufacturers that you can't have certain colors. What would we tell them? I mean, we'd have to also restrict the color of balls. Right now, we've got blue balls, and we've got red, we've got pink, we've got different color shades of the neon yellow and neon green. What colors would we ban? So we have to be very careful. Unless we want to go the route of tennis or ping pong and say it's either this color ball or this color ball.
Yeah,
but we're not there yet.
Why not?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, the easy answer is because nobody's proposed something along those lines. That's an easy answer.
Are you asking me to propose this, Mark?
No, but it makes it a lot easier if someone else does it. Otherwise, we get this. There's a bunch of good old boys in a back room making up these rules. I would much rather this be an open process where people participate in it. I can tell you who's going to probably be against it is going to be some of the manufacturers of balls. They enjoy being able to innovate and put out new colors because it's. I mean, I've seen a lot.
Well, we're talking about sanctioned tournament play, essentially, right? Yep. So, I've never been to a tournament that used anything other than a yellow ball.
I have to think about that. I haven't either, and that's because that's the ball that the manufacturers provide usually to the tournament director to get their ball in front of the public. So
right. Well, that would just make it easier to tell people to stop wearing yellow clothing and apparel, and we could all know exactly what we're getting into, and paddle manufacturers wouldn't make yellow paddles, and it would all be very easy.
Yeah, but we don't want to tell Selkirk no more red paddles. I mean,
no, well, don't, as long as there's no yellow, as long as we're not using red balls, then we don't have to worry about that problem.
I agree. I'm looking forward to how you would propose the rule to be written.
Well, speaking of which, I would like to talk about why the Whitwell Walkway did not pass.
It's because it's already banned by the rules.
This was for an exception for seniors and Lee Whitwell.
That was probably, it's one of the funniest things that I've had come across my desk, and it was very clever, very clever.
Well, glad we could help with that. Hey, one last rule change for this year was the equipment timeout. I guess in years past, if equipment were to malfunction, or I guess that counts for something like a shoelace breaks or something like that, you would be charged a timeout to fix that. In this, we are changing the rules now to say it is not a charged timeout.
And I saw this in spades as head referee at a couple of tournaments where we have players show up with one paddle, and the paddle breaks during their warm up or during the first few rallies, not because they trashed the paddle. That's a different story. But it basically just broke right at the throat. They didn't have a second paddle, interestingly enough, and so now, by rule, we would have said, well, you got to use your normal 2 timeouts before you can get an equipment timeout. An equipment timeout is only 2 minutes. So the most, if you hadn't used any of your timeouts that you had, is 4 minutes. Now, how are you going to go get a paddle in 4 minutes?